57talk.com. Gary Cubetta back with you again, Scottsdale, Arizona, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Mooneyham, writer with the Charleston, South Carolina Post and Courier. Mike, pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be on the show, Gary.
And Mike, a lot of our listeners have emailed me asking to have you on the show. I've heard your name before. I'm not that familiar with your work, so I started to research some of the articles you've written. And you are one hell of a writer when it comes to wrestling. I don't know. Do you write about various subjects or?
Mostly wrestling. I've done this for so many years, Gary. It's kind of scary to go back as far as I've been doing this.
Well, usually when you get an article about professional wrestling in a newspaper, it's going to be substandard.
Yeah.
You know how it is. They're kind of light.
Yep.
And you've got an article you just finished about the book written about Gordon, the late Gordon Soley, and it's just a magnificent piece of writing, and the detail is incredible. I've never seen anything like this when it comes to professional wrestling before, and I want to congratulate you for doing such a wonderful job with the article.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I've got to know a good many of the guys who have been in the business for actually a couple of generations now. And it's just something I really enjoy writing about. The wrestling world is such a colorful world in itself, and there are so many really unique individuals in this business. And, it's just I've had the pleasure of writing about these guys for many, many years now.
Why is it that your newspaper sees fit to devote this type of time and effort to wrestling when most don't?
That's a good question, Gary. Actually, I've got the longest-running column in the country. My wrestling column has been in continuous publication for about 21 years now, and it's in our sports section every Sunday. When I started doing this column for the paper, we weren't certain how this was going to turn out. No other major newspaper devoted, a weekly section to wrestling. But as we went along, we found out that quite a few people read this, and it became a popular staple of our paper, and, been doing it ever since.
Now, if a listener of our program wanted to see, this article is currently posted, are the past articles posted as well?
Many of them are, yeah. You can just go to the Post and Courier and look under columnist. My name will be there. And if you go to archives, you'll see, I'm not sure how many years they go back, but there are quite a few of them archived on our newspaper website, and that's postandcourier.com.
Postandcourier.com. Mm-hmm. Mike, what do you think of professional wrestling circa 2009?
Well, I think it's certainly turned into a different business. WWE, which is by far the major company, they've gone to a PG rating and sort of softened their approach to the business. That's why you see these guest hosts, guest celebrities every week on Raw. They've really become, in fact, I did a column on this just a few weeks ago. Whatever happened to those Crimson Masks? Where's the blood? There's no blood on these shows anymore. And I kind of understand why they do it, to keep that PG rating. But it's not the business. It's certainly not the business I grew up with. And it's sports entertainment. I mean, they make no bones about it. It's complete sports entertainment, and the wrestling part of it is actually probably not the biggest part of the show anymore.
Mike, you've been in this you've been a fan for 40, you've been writing for 20 years and a fan for 40 years, right?
Well, Gary, actually, I'm not that old of a guy, but I actually started writing for major pro wrestling magazines as early as the mid-'60s.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I was a kid.
Now, I look at your picture here that I have printed out. You don't look that old.
No, I'm not. But I was barely a teenager when I began writing.
Okay.
I started following it. I just became, I was hooked at a very early age. I saw it on TV one day, and then I said, I got to go to this local show. And from there on out, I submitted some articles to some pro wrestling magazines, and they had no idea how old I was.
Oh, wow.
So, I got hooked up with press cards and credentials, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was going all over the southeast part of the United States covering wrestling shows.
So who are you covering these shows for? In the newspaper or the wrestling magazines?
These were magazines. Yeah, I was much too young, for newspaper work, but I worked for some pro wrestling magazines such as The Ring, Wrestling Review, some of the major magazines of that time.
And you used your name?
Oh, yeah, right. Mike Mooneyham, yeah.
Okay. The audience is, so some of them are scratching their heads saying, Gary, why don't you know this? And okay, folks, we see the weakness in my knowledge of the sport. Were you in the Carolinas the whole time?
Yeah, right here in Charleston, South Carolina. I've lived here most of my life, and of course I had a natural affinity for Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, which I honestly believe was the Carolinas and Virginia, in my estimation, it was the best wrestling territory back in those days, the 60s and 70s, along with Florida and Georgia, both very strong wrestling circuits. But, a lot of great guys came out of the Carolinas.
It's funny, Mike. If you look at it today, it's really no surprise that the Carolinas, there's no longer Crockett wrestling there because, of course, we've grown up and gotten older with that as a fact.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the 70s and the early 1980s, and someone was to say that there wouldn't be a Mid-Atlantic or Crockett wrestling in the Carolinas, it would just be hard to believe, right?
It would. It certainly would be because the territory was literally on fire. I mean, here you had guys like Ric Flair, Johnny Valentine, Greg Valentine. The list goes on and on. And with that kind of talent, how are you going to beat that? But the wrestling business changed. In the early mid '80s, we were on to bigger things, and I wouldn't necessarily say better, because if you look back to the old territorial days, we had hundreds of guys wrestling on a nightly basis. I mean, there were much more guys in the business making their living from the business. And now we see a select few who are actually, making a lot of money in the wrestling business.
And a reflection of how strong Crockett's business was, I remember in the late 70s and even early 80s, you guys ran weekly in a lot of the towns, and the main events, I remember they'd run the same main event over and over and over again, and it would draw. The people just loved their wrestling.
Oh, it was wonderful. The back then, the house shows worked off of the TV shows. The TV shows were was the vehicle by which the house shows were promoted, and those are the ones that made the money. It's not like today, but yeah, I mean it was weekly. I know in Charleston, we had weekly matches here at our local auditorium every Friday night for years. And a lot of the smaller towns, would have matches every 2 or 3 weeks, so everybody got to see it. Now, you're lucky if you get a major show come into your town once a year, and that's, if you're a fairly sizable market.
Mike, how do you see the future of wrestling going forward? It's obviously much different than the late 70s, 80s, even the 90s. The talent base is greatly diminished. 10 years from now, do you picture that Vince will still be limping along, making a lot of money, but with a sport that's half dead?
Gary, I think he will. I mean, there's a lot invested in that company, and they have a lot of fans who are going to stick with them regardless. I would venture to say most of their fan base, they don't even remember the era we're discussing. I think it's at a point right now where they're going to have a good audience. I don't know if it will ever be like it was during the Monday Night Wars of the mid and late 90s, where the ratings were just through the roof. But I think he's got a machine that's going to be around for a long time, and it might not be the wrestling that we remember, but it'll be sports entertainment. It'll be celebrity driven. It'll be entertainment driven. But I think probably his kids will be running the business. After Vince is gone.
You wrote this article about Gordon, and it is a great article. How do you think that Gordon would fit in if he was younger, and he was younger today, still alive? Do you think that there'd be a place in wrestling for someone like a Gordon Solie?
Well, I discussed this with Gordon, for years before his passing, and he just didn't want to have anything to do with the business. I don't think he would have really considered working in World Wrestling Entertainment under Vince McMahon. And Gordon was very disheartened by how wrestling had moved along, even when he was with WCW those final years. I would talk to him, and his heart certainly wasn't in it. He held on to some of the memories, and I don't think Gordon really believed that it would ever go back to those days. But no, unfortunately today there's not a place for Gordon Solie. You would have to have an announcer who is bombastic and loud and really just part of the show, and that wasn't Gordon at all. The closest thing we have today to a Gordon Solie is Jim Ross, and Jim does a great job. He's very knowledgeable, and he's the guy that I would most closely compare a Gordon Solie to. Jim really does a wonderful job.
Was it difficult for Gordon going from that premier position on TBS, where the entire country could see him every Saturday night, 6 p.m., to kind of being on the outskirts of wrestling until WCW hired him and they didn't really feature him? Was that tough for him mentally? Yeah,
it was a really tough time for him. After Florida Championship Wrestling dissolved and in the latter days of Georgia Championship Wrestling, it had become difficult for Gordon. And when there were a few years there where he wasn't actually doing much work at all, and it was tough for him because he had done this since 1960. He started in the wrestling business in 1960 in Florida, and he had been used to some. Florida had great wrestling as well. I mean, they had a terrific lineup, and he had the privilege of announcing some of the greatest matches in the history of wrestling. So when it came to this point, it was very tough for Gordon, as it is the case for a lot of people whose jobs have dramatically changed. The industry had changed, and I could tell his heart just wasn't in it.
Yeah, he seemed very sad there at the end. I didn't see it mentioned in your article. I know it's talked about a little bit in the book, in that originally Gordon, when he was diagnosed with cancer, didn't want actual treatment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. He refused, and part of it was due to the fact that his wife had passed away, and for a while Gordon just he pretty much gave up on life. Toward the end, though, with his family, his children, and a lot of friends in Florida, he got like a sort of a little push there toward the end where he really thought he could make the best of a very bad situation, but the cancer, unfortunately progressed, and that was it. It was the end of a legendary career for, the guy I would consider the greatest wrestling announcer in the history of the business.
Did Gordon feel that if the powers that be in the NWA had maybe made a few different decisions, things could have worked out differently? Was he frustrated that Vince was allowed to run so free?
He was extremely frustrated, but Gordon was a very intelligent man, and he understood that the wrestling industry was changing. Cable TV was getting stronger. Pay-per-view business was starting to kick in, and he saw the writing on the wall. But of course, there was a runaway train, and there was nothing he could do.
But Mike, what's amazing about that is Gordon is taping a show every Saturday night, minutes, maybe seconds from the office of Ted Turner,
yeah,
who is about to be on top of the entire world of cable, pay-per-view, the whole 9 yards. They're sitting right there, and Vince up in Stamford, Connecticut, who has no ties to any network, ends up in control. I've always thought it was just so strange. In a way, Gordon was right there with the technology. Not that he had, he was a player as far as management, but
right,
he was right there.
Right. Well, I never thought the Turner organization didn't. I mean, they had the wrestling. Georgia Championship Wrestling was one of its best shows in the early days. But you're kind of right with all of that technology and right there at their fingertips, they could have done a much better job of promoting the product. And unfortunately, that was the case for many years. They could have done a lot better, and perhaps they could have held off a few more years before Vince got his clutches into the business. But I guess that's just the way it goes.
Mike, do you think from your reporting over the years that Vince was destined to be the guy, or do you think Vince became the guy due to incompetence from the competition?
That was pretty much it. For the most part, the NWA, the promoters, the organization pretty much had its head in the sand.
Yeah.
They were, by the time they figured they could play the game, it was too late. Vince was already entrenched. The machinery was in motion. It was too late. So yes, it was due to the incompetence or the lack of vision by these old promoters that Vince. And it had not been Vince, it would have been somebody. Vince was in the right place at the right time, and he had the vision to take advantage of what was there.
I think what a lot of people overlook is in '84 and '85 when the NWA did run some shows back east, a lot of the East Coast fans were sick and tired of the WWF product at the time. And they were really, the first few NWA shows that went up there did very well, but it just seems that there was a lack of organization that really cost them.
Yeah, too little, too late, and of course Vince came in, and he and his dad had always had a very good relationship with the building managers, and what he did was he got exclusive contracts with the managers of the big arenas, and pretty much blocked opposition. You know, the NWA and other opposition blocked him out of the major arenas.
Mike, did Gordon ever mention to you that maybe Vince had wanted him to be part of what he was doing? I remember that Vince had contacted Howard Cosell, of all people, wanting him to be an announcer. But Gordon never worked for Vince, did?
No, he didn't, and he didn't tell me. But there is a little mention in the book that there was a feeler out from Vince that they might be interested in Gordon, but apparently he never responded, or it was so insignificant that maybe maybe there wasn't that much interest coming from Vince's camp. And I think people back then knew that Gordon was he was deeply indebted to the NWA, and he was not a WWF guy type of guy, and I think they knew that going in. So, yeah. But let's be honest. Gordon would not have been a good fit up there. I could see Gordon miserable, from day one. I don't think it would have been a good fit at all.
How do you come up with your articles? Let's say, are you working on one for next Sunday, for this Sunday?
Gary, they usually come to me. If I started on something on Monday or Tuesday, something would supersede it by Friday. So, I could basically write about anything, but there'll probably be a major topic to write about, coming up in the next couple of days.
Do people call you, or do you have to do the calling?
After so many years in the business, I get a lot of people calling me.
Oh, wow.
And, I've had such a great time. Earlier this year, I received the James Melby Award at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in Waterloo, Iowa, which was really, a high water mark for me. I knew Jim back from the 60s. We kind of both started out, writing about the business.
He was with the Kaiser publication.
He
right?
certainly was.
Right,
yeah,
right. He was like the historian, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful historian. Jim passed away a couple of years ago, and I was just deeply honored to receive that award at the Hall of Fame ceremony this year.
Are there ever weeks that you just can't come up with something, real timely, and that kind of a writer's block, a subject block?
Every once in a while, but not often at all, because if there's not something major happening, I can always just write a basic feature story. So no, I fortunately, I don't run into that too often.
Have you thought about writing books on wrestling?
Actually, I did. I co-authored a book in 2002, Sex, Lies, and Headlocks.
Oh, okay.
The real story of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. Very successful. It was a New York Times bestseller. Had a great time doing the book, and I hope to do another one down the line. But it's really been the newspaper business in general has we've had a tough couple of years, and so our workload has increased, and spare time is hard to find.
Well, judging from what I see here, anything you write would be great, and I can see how you could end up as a bestseller. I've got to check that out. Mike, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your schedule to talk with us. I'm going to make sure I check out all your articles because they are excellent, and I do appreciate it.
I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure, Gary. I've enjoyed this time.
And hopefully we'll get to talk again.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.